Hello everyone. In this video I will walk you through the Kubernetes DNS Lookup and I will explain how the DNS system works within the Kubernetes. So let's get started. So I have this scenario for this particular demo. So I have two namespace, front-end namespace, front-end NS, and back-end namespace, back-end NS. These two namespaces have a single pod and a service which exposes that particular pod. So I have two pods and two services, and they are both within that namespace. And I have a client pod. I call it DNS utils pod, and this DNS utils pod, which is a client pod, I will create that into the front-end namespace, and when it tries to connect to the front-end service, you will see it uses the exact name of the front-end service, and it doesn't need any namespace at the at suffix or at the back, because they both are in the same namespace. But when the same client pod, DNS utils pod, when it tries to connect to the backend service, it would need the backend service, the name, and the backend NS namespace. So it will be like how this is how the DNS works. So in the same namespace, we can refer directly by service, but if we are going from one namespace to the other namespace, we need the service name plus the namespace name. And if this pod, or if the default client pod is in the default namespace, for example somewhere over here, so if the default default DNS utils pod is in the default namespace, then it would require service name dot namespace name for the both service. So if it's something like this, then it would require this kind of format, like how I explained here, like this kind of format, name, service name and the namespace name. Okay. And all the commands for this demo I'll be sharing within the slides, and it will be available to you. And let's get started. So I have logged into my Kubernetes master node, control plane node, and first I will create the namespace front-end NS. So namespace has been created. Then I will run a front-end pod, and it is using image nginx. The front-end pod has been created. Okay, it's running as well. Next I will expose that pod, and it's running on port 80, and I am giving a name front-end SVC for the service name. So the pod and service has been created. If I do a get all, we can see the pod and service. Now I will run the DNS utils client pod. So this pod is a pod which can be used for any testing. So it's available at this particular GSR E2E end-to-end test images, and this is a Jesse DNS utils image name, and I'm making it run sleep for 1 hour so that I can do some testing. So the DNS utils pod has been created. And if I do a get service, so I'll explain now. So this is the default service that comes with the Kubernetes. So if I do default get service, you will see a Kubernetes service, and it runs in the default namespace. So now if I do, for example, if I exec into DNS utils pod, and if I do NS lookup, so first, as I mentioned, we have to give the service name which is matching with Kubernetes, and dot the service name, namespace name. So you will see we have given default. The reason is because the namespace name is default. So you will see that's why we have given default. So I'll just show you. If I do get NS, we have the default namespace, and Kubernetes runs in that. So this is the basic test. If you want to make sure the DNS works in your system, you can exec into any pod. So I have exec into the client pod and perform the NS lookup. Okay, now I'll show you. Now we are doing the they are both in the same namespace, and DNS utils is trying to do a lookup of front end SVC, and I don't have to provide the namespace name because both are in this same namespace. So it has successfully resolved. If I have given the SVC and the namespace name, this will also work because it's a more fully qualified name. So now I will go to the second part, where is I will create a second backend namespace, and I will run the backend pod, and I will make sure it's running. Okay, it's up and running. And then I will expose the backend pod on port 80, and the service name will be backend SVC. And we can see the pod and the service. Now the first part below will fail as namespace is missing. So this is what I wanted to explain. So if I do from the herein, I am logging into the client pod or the DNS utils pod, which is running in the other namespace. And if I do a NS lookup for the backend SVC, which is in a different, which is in the backend NS namespace, this will fail because we haven't specified the namespace at the end, so it wouldn't resolve. And to fix it, we have to just provide the namespace name at the end, dot namespace name. So I've just changed, I've added dot backend NS, and this should work, right? So it has successfully resolved the backend service in the backend namespace. Okay, I'll just perform some cleanup. So everything within front end namespace has been deleted. Now the backend namespace. That's all I wanted to cover for the DNS lookup. Thanks for watching. Bye.